Hey guys, welcome to today's show. I've got a really lovely friend on today. Her name is Mars Skae. I've known her for a few years. Me and Lisa, we love hanging out with them, sharing dinners together, and just catching up on life. So Mars is married with her daughter. She's a consultant pediatric endocrinologist. She loves cake baking, singing, super passionate about helping people get better, super passionate about helping people get to know Jesus better, and she has another like passion for seeing women achieve their maximum potential. So those are fascinating topics, and would love to dig into those a little bit more. Mars, welcome.
Thank you, Andy, for having me on.
So you've always, I've always like whenever we've caught up, I've said to you, Mars, how are you even doing all the things that you're doing? And even those list of things as well. All of them could be full-time jobs by themselves, but for you, you cram it all together. What is it that really, how do you do that? First of all, I'm interested.
How do I do it? Okay, so I think I do it with great diary management. So one of the first things I learned when I got married was I needed a syncable diary with my hubby Andrew, and that's the only way we slot things into the diary. And then just making space for everything. I live quite a high-paced life, and that's so I kind of think every minute needs to count. So as an old friend of mine used to say, you do your reading in the loo. And yeah, you've got to try and juggle it. Sometimes don't do it too good and you get the work-life balance a little wrong, but you just need to rebalance at times.
Sure.
And
And
work stay hard.
work hard, play hard. I like that. Reading on the loo, I like that too. Just maximize every second, every minute. um, so how did you, I don't know if you're one of the people, Mars, that doing what you're doing now, especially in saying your job, um, is that what you intended from an early age? Did you know that this was where you were going to end up?
Um, so it was my dream from I think probably about the age of 7. I really wanted to be a doctor. And the reason for that was because when I was young, I wasn't very well. I was quite a poorly child. And my mom was a single mom who didn't have much money at the time. And so there was a lovely lady pediatrician who used to give us free medicine. And she always had a jar of boiled sweets on her table that probably wouldn't be acceptable in today's obesity drive. But every time I went to see the doctor, I got to put my hand in and get a little boiled sweet. And I thought to myself, goodness, if I can do this for somebody else, that would be fantastic. And so, yeah, from a pretty early age, I decided I want to help people. And I wanted to be a child doctor, a pediatrician. Yeah.
That's great. So having that clarity early on and, stemming from your personal experience, was that an easy ride then? Because you knew what you were aiming for and you took all the steps necessary to get to that point?
So the answer to that question is no. I did at one point stray and decided I wanted to be an archaeologist, and my mom said no because I'd be poor for the rest of my life. And that was the end of that debate. But no, it was difficult because I grew up in Malaysia, and to get to medical school required you to be part of a quota because they had racial quotas for entry to university. And you had to be extremely good at certain things, including speaking the Malay language. And I realized at the age of 12 that the only way I would get to medical school was to try and get what was known then and still is now the ASEAN scholarship. So I left home at 15 to pursue my, O levels and A levels in Singapore after winning a scholarship. So you had to work really hard. And it was hard leaving home at 15. And then the next phase was really trying to get to university, and that was not funded. And that's where a lot of prayer and knowing that medicine was God's call on my life motivated me and my mom to trust that God had a higher calling on my life. And miraculously, and I do say miraculously, a wonderful individual saw my grades and decided they would sponsor me and set up a trust fund to enable me to get to medical school in the UK. And that's how I embarked on my journey.
Wow, that's that's incredible. So that led you to the UK,
Yeah.
and then was there much further training before you got involved into doing the actual job itself?
So I would probably discourage any medical student who wants to, or any student who wants to come into medicine. Most of the sixth formers who come to me, I go, don't do medicine, don't do medicine. You need to be determined because medicine is a hard slog, and it's something you have to be really passionate about. Lots of people come into medicine and then maybe think actually it's not the thing for them because you're always giving out a lot of the time. And depending on what speciality you do, for example, if you did cancer medicine or things like that, you have to be prepared to give a bit of yourself to everybody that you see. So it's really important that you have a good network of people who can feed your life and encourage you. Um, and that's why my wonderful family and friends in my church really input into that because I'm constantly on the go and inputting into the lives of other people.
Hmm. So it's funny, you've walked those steps and you're warning everybody else about the perils that lie ahead if they follow in your footsteps. And you mentioned it's so important to have that passion. Like, could you specify passion in what or about what or towards what?
Um, So I am really passionate about a few things. One is I really believe in excellence and doing the absolute best that you can do for an individual or in anything I do personally. So most people who know me know I'm a bit of a psycho when it comes to just being a bit of a perfectionist,
In the
if I
best way, in the good way.
in a good way. Because I don't like doing something half-heartedly. If I do something, I consider it if to think about, do I really want to do this? Because if I do it, then I go 100%. Um, I'm really passionate about seeing women particularly, and to be honest, Andy, I am not one of these gender crazy people, but I really believe that we have 50% of our society who do not achieve their maximum potential a lot of the time due to various constraints, but also just the social taboos around what you can achieve as a woman. And so I'm really passionate about being an example to women out there to show them that you can be at the high, you can function in at the highest level in, I suppose one could say a pretty male dominated workforce, and do well at that. And I'm also passionate about showing people that, motherhood isn't the end of your life or
Mm,
your career. It is, I think it's really important that moms particularly demonstrate to their children and their daughters that they too can achieve things and be a mover and a shaker in whatever they do, whether they're at school or, in their neighborhood. So
yeah,
those are I'm passionate about. Yeah.
they're great. I mean, so that last point that you touched upon is isn't necessarily specific to your industry or to your workplace. It's just a value that you would, you know, try to live out and express whatever environment that you find yourself in, right?
Yeah.
So in your current environment though, how does that play out? As well as setting the example, you know, with the influence that you have, Mars, if you're happy to share more about that, how does that play out in your thinking as you have that in your mind?
So at the moment, I am my team leader of well, one of the largest endocrinology departments in the country, pediatric endocrinology. So they're much fewer in number. And so my ethos is that is really in encouraging everybody and really bringing a positive influence into the workplace, and really helping people realize that they're good at what they do. I think a lot of people are undervalued, or think that they're not good enough. And so, it's from being in the workplace and saying to noticing the secretary who's bought a new top, and telling her, hey, you look really good this morning. Because that puts a smile on somebody's face, and just starting a day with a positive attitude can affect how your work is. To even the cleaners at work, just thanking them for what they do. And I think it's really, I try and bring a positive influence into work every day. I also very much believe in transparency and team working. So I think very often, sometimes we can isolate our members of our team. Um, and one of the principles that I really believe in is being on the shop floor so that your your team respect you. So even though I'm a team leader, I try and do a bit of everything that the others do as well, so that I appreciate the struggles. I appreciate, um, obviously I don't spend time on the wards as much as my junior doctors do, and they take a lot of instruction from me. But then I say, hey guys, let's do a ward round. Let's go together and see the patients together once a week or something like that, so that they know I'm in it with them. um, so that's the other thing is, no, people, if they know you're there holding their hand, or you've got their back, they also work better, and they are encouraged to do their best as well. My junior doctors will often know, if they're working late, I tell them to go home, but they also know that often I'm in at work much later than them, and so they have respect for the fact that I'm not skiving off, and they know, oh gosh, Dr. Skae, I remember one of my junior doctors saying to me, um, Dr. Skae, do you ever go home? And and it's setting the bar, because you want to constantly be setting the bar to challenge them, but also then holding their hand, having their back, and just encouraging people on a daily basis and being real. That's really important as well.
That's awesome, Mars. I think you touched on so many like powerful principles of leadership in there. You know, the like first of all, really assuming your full responsibility as a leader, but recognizing that it doesn't necessarily have to be authoritarian, or you don't distance yourself from the front line. You recognize the need for your staff to be understood, and also that for that to happen, for you to stay in touch, with the things that are happening on the ground,
Yeah,
even though you might not have to do those things. You recognize that it really helps you in your role.
yeah.
That's really good. So you mentioned God. You mentioned a lot of prayer at the beginning, that God had that calling for you, and you would pray through that and believe in His promises to deliver. How has your faith evolved, and how does that affect the workplace and some of the other things that you do outside of work as well?
So my faith, I would say, is absolutely essential to what I do, and who I am as a person. Um, I most days go into work flying on on the wing of faith, because I'm winging it a lot of the time. um, and sometimes that's quite good, because I'm often taken out of my comfort zone. And as a result, I have to pray real hard that I am inspired by God, and that I'm constantly, you know, I've got his wisdom in a lot. That might sound weird, but I really, on a daily basis, believe that God gives me wisdom to deal with some of the things that I deal with, including difficult situations and life-changing situations for people. Um, so prayer is an essential part of my day, um, and um, and I really believe in biblical principles. I think the Bible is great at inspiring you and people in the workplace. You know, just the ethics around, you know, take for example a simple proverb like, "What you sow is what you reap. By the measure you give is the measure you receive." So, you know, if you want to get the best out of people, then sow into them, because that's what you'll reap out of people. Um, and the other thing about faith is that I'm really open about it to my work colleagues. I mean, a lot of my work colleagues are not Christian, but they know I am Christian. And so as a result, I'm not afraid to say, you know, my colleagues, if they're in difficult situations, like, you know, having a parent with cancer, or they're ill themselves, or, you know, being screened for something serious like that, they know I'm there, and they will come to me and say, you know, Mars, can you pray for me? They know all about my Bible study group at home once a week. And so they will say, well, can you ask your Bible study group to pray for me, or pray for my dad, or something like that. So people, you know, I believe in being open about my faith with people. And there are times when they will come and ask questions, and just taking those opportunities to share your faith and why you believe what you do in those moments. So yeah,
Mm,
all the time.
that's awesome. Are there are there certain restrictions in place as to how, you know, faith sharing, and, you know, sometimes these, and it's not just because it's the Christian faith, but, you know, where there's this kind of political correctness of like making sure that people are not enforcing too much of their own views on other people. I mean, that's becoming a thing. Is that a thing for you? What's your take on it?
Yeah, so I grew up in Malaysia, and Malaysia is a Muslim nation, where you can't evangelize publicly on the street. So I grew up with a huge fear, actually, of sharing the gospel with people, or doing it publicly. Um, I am not what I suppose people traditionally call a Bible basher. You know, I don't you know, insist on trying to share my faith. But what I do really believe in is that, and you can see this, you can read this up in medical journals, okay? Prayer, okay? Prayer significantly improves outcomes for sick people, okay? So there must be an element there that prayer and having faith in someone who is superior to you, and a God who can, you know, help you, makes a difference. The second thing that's really obvious is that faith, or faith-based sort of beliefs, gives you a future and a hope. And people who don't have a future and a hope are the people who kind of spiral down into depression and spiral downwards. So I'm very clear about where my faith is, okay? And you know, so I ask open questions. So, for example, a very open question is, to let's say a patient in a very difficult situation is, do you have a faith that can help you at this time? Now, that's an open question, and people will say, well, actually, no, I don't. And that's fine. That ends that conversation. But often, sometimes somebody would say, well, actually, yeah, I do. Or something like, you know, do you pray? You know, and if they say yes, then you can just say, well, if that's the case, you know, would you like me to pray for you? And they might say no. And, you know, that gives them an opt out at that point. Or they can say yes. And I believe in holistic care for any and everyone. So my argument is that as a medic, I shouldn't just be about medicine. And that extends to my area of interest, which is childhood obesity. I believe that happy families eat better. Families that eat together eat better. And happy families do more exercise, get more activity. So it's about providing holistic care. And so faith and prayer are part of that. I
Hmm.
can't detract from that.
Hmm. That's a great view. I like that. That's a great view. And so maybe this is why you do the extracurricular things, part of a holistic view you have of cake baking and singing and any other activities that you're involved in. I mean, you mentioned diary management is super important. Syncing it with your husband is super important. Are those things like, are they your hobbies? Are they your way of just finding release? What are those things to you, the extra things that you do?
Okay, so I'm a great believer in exercising both sides of your brain, um, and so sorry, that sounds quite scientific and clinical. Isn't it? What I mean by that is that I think you know your work and your everyday stuff uses one bit of your brain, but it's really important to have an outlet for creativity, um, whether that's photography, which I do enjoy, or art, or singing, or music, or something that you wouldn't do on an ordinary, because it just breaks the monotony of what you do on a regular basis. Um, I got into cake baking only because um, birthday cakes were so expensive. I'm a bit tight on the budget, and I, if I'm gonna, I want my daughter to have a great birthday cake every year, but then I wasn't about to pay like 50 quid for a nice birthday cake. I thought, well, here we go. Let's use YouTube and learn to bake cakes, and that kind of grew into something. So actually, this coming week, I'm secretly. So hopefully, this isn't going to go out too quickly, doing a 40th birthday cake for a friend. So, and it gives me a great outlet to really be creative, and likewise, another thing that I really enjoy is worship and music, and praising God. So you talked about extracurricular activities. I love to be in the band at church and singing, and yeah. So and you gotta, like I said, you gotta work hard and you gotta play hard. So
Mm.
those are all my playthings. They just enable me to let down my hair and chill out and hang out with people. Usually, especially with the band nowadays, they're all like 15 or something like that. You just get a different take on things, from the younger generation. So
Yeah.
yeah, I enjoy that.
It's really cool, and that work hard, play hard mentality, that approach. I know some people might hear the diary managing all of this, and they even get stressed out hearing about it because it feels like everything's being compartmentalized. But for you, that's optimum, right? That's the best way of making sure that you do all these things, including rest, like the intentional planning, the intentional decision making. So, right, because some people might just be like, well, I'll just wake up and I'll see what I feel like doing today to exercise my creative part of me.
Yeah. So what I would I am my mother taught me to use a diary when I was I think it was 10 or 12, because she realized that if I didn't actually write down what I was doing and having a timetable, I would end up watching Neighbors or something like that instead of just studying for my exams. Um, but what I find is that if you lead a busy life and you don't put things or make space for those things and make clear space for them, actually you get anxious. It makes you anxious because there is a saying in Malay that says sikit sikit lama lama jadi bukit, which means a little eventually becomes a mountain. You can't climb a mountain unless you put one foot in front of the other. So and this is where I'm quite obsessed with my husband as well, that we always identify what the huge things are, and try and make time for them. My husband also has this great analogy, which is, if you have a jar and you put all the fine grains of sand in, you actually often can't put in the big stones and the medium-sized stones. But if you put the big stones in first and then the medium-sized stones and then you pour the sand in, you get a lot more into the jar. So identify what are the essentials that you have to do, put them in first, then the not so important essentials, and then finally the frivolous things like cake baking and having a jolly here and there. But that way you get it all in, and you get it in a way where you're not stressed and you're not running around like a headless chicken. So
Yeah, it's good. And what you get back from that is knowing that you've really lived like a really fulfilling day, a week, a month, right?
yeah, absolutely. One thing that I seem to be a strong believer in a lot of things, but you know, in the job I do, one thing that really comes home to me is that life is really short, much shorter than we really appreciate. um, which is why I'm so driven to make every moment count, whether that's moments with your family. So my grandma died when I was 18, and so I took time out of college to go look after her. Um, but one thing I said to myself after she died was that I would always say the things I want to say to people. I would always try and do all the things I want to do, because you never should take the next day for granted. Never assume that you have the luxury of that. If you do, that's a blessing, but live to the full. And yeah, if you fall out with somebody, ring them up straight away and talk to them, because you might never get that opportunity again. So don't assume you will. And so I think one thing might, it might sound a bit morbid, but that's something my job has taught me, is really to appreciate life when you've got it.
Mm, mm. It's good. That's good. Thank you so much, Mars. I have one final question for you.
Oh, okay.
How do you intend to increase your impact going forward?
Okay. So I've been thinking about this. Well, one thing I am trying to do is so I'm a huge believer in the next generation and building legacy. So it's not about me. It's about how I influence people so that they take that forward. Jesus did that. He had 3 years of ministry, but his church has gone on for centuries, because he was a strong believer in sustainability, and also longevity and future planning. So I'm really trying very hard, and very much. So one of the projects that kind of did, was to look at my daughter and her friends, because they're a great bunch of girls. And I wanted very much, for them to know that they could do amazing things even from a young age. So what we did was we set up a fundraising event once a year for them to pick a charity that supports children, so children supporting children. And I started teaching them to sing, so that they could become a choir every Christmas. Last year, we did an event where we did crafts, and they had their own stall and they sold crafts. But these girls, what was amazing last year was that their parents stood back as these girls, 7 and 8 year olds, were running a stall and managed to get the MP for our area to cough up his money to buy their crafts for a charity supporting children in Uganda. So these girls believe that they can be movers and shakers, even from the age of 7 and 8. So one of my things that I strongly believe in is influencing the next generation, influencing the young people who will do much greater and better things than I will ever do. And the second thing, which I'm trying to deal with, is learning to blog and get a bit of tech on board. So this month, I'm actually investing in this because when I'm just about to embark on a project which will need me to disseminate the information that I've got. So I'm trying to embrace more technology this month to work out how I can, have one of these groups that I can disseminate information to. So yeah, tech and children.
Yeah. Tech and children's a short answer. That's amazing, Mars. And being able to see, I love that legacy, right? Being able to see that there's things going on that are bigger than yourself. Uh, and when you contribute to those things, you just, those are the type of things that provide that bigger motivation, right? Sometimes they're a bigger drive, looking outward versus looking inward, looking long term versus looking short term. And I love it. And then also that increased level of just leveling up all the time. You mentioned tech there at the end. Sometimes we think we've reached capacity, um, but then we become normalized to that. And when we set ourselves to bigger goals, we find that there's actually more space to continually grow into.
Yeah.
And that's just constant progress. That doesn't end.
Yeah, no, totally. So yeah, that's where, we hang out with some younger people who often tell us, "Oh, do you know about this app and that app?" That yesterday I was hanging out with a much older person who just showed me a new app. So yeah, I think having an attitude of wanting to learn from anybody, everybody, because age is not a barrier to learning, and anybody can teach you something valuable. So always be I always try and step back when I'm in a situation. I learned this in my medical school exams, by the way. They always said, if you saw a patient, step back, look around you, and then go examine the patient. And so yeah, it's important to step back, look around you, see what's interesting, what's new, have a lateral take on things. And then that changes your practice, and always be changing, because anybody who becomes stagnant, anybody who stays in their comfort zone too long, uh, kind of goes backward rather than forward. And so you've always got to be moving forward. It's like being in a river. You always have to be moving. Otherwise, if you try and stay in one place, you just kind of end up being worn away.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's important.
That's great. Mars, thank you so much. I think you've imparted an incredible amount of wisdom in this. And what is so apparent is that the authenticity that this comes from. This comes from your personal life experience. You're not just regurgitating this stuff because you've been reading it this week or it's on some article, but you're living it out, and you're doing amazing things directly and indirectly. I think you'd be surprised when you eventually find out the reach that you've had through the things that you've been doing. So it's incredible. Thank you so much for being on and sharing your story.
That's great. And hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Yes, would love that. Thank you, Mars. You take care. Bye bye now.